Welcome to Hardly, where books turn into 3 stories, refreshing your knowledge in minutes. Today, we study together Hugo Storey's The Refugee Definition in International Law, in which we probe into the complexities and evolving interpretations of refugee status in international law, focusing on the Geneva Convention's definition and its application across diverse legal systems. Dr. Hugo Storey, B.A. Hans, University of Sydney, B. Phil, Oxon, Ph.D., University of Leeds, is a recently retired judge of the Upper Tribunal, UK. Don't go away. Hardly the editor will be right back with the story. Let me share with you 3 stories that bring the intricacies of refugee status to life. The first story takes us to the Mediterranean, where a young woman named Layla fled her war-torn country with nothing but her determination to survive. After surviving a harrowing journey, she found herself in a European country, seeking asylum. But her application was met with skepticism, not because she lacked a story, but because her reasons for fleeing didn't fit neatly into the predefined categories of persecution. Layla's fear was real. She had been threatened by armed groups because of her refusal to support their cause. Yet, the question that hung over her case was whether this fear was rooted in one of the recognized grounds: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Her fate rested on the interpretation of these terms, and the outcome would determine whether she could build a new life or be sent back to face potential danger. As her case moved through the courts, it became clear that the line between a legitimate refugee and an economic migrant was thin, often dictated by the perspectives of those interpreting the law. Our second story centers on Ahmed, an LGBTQ+ activist from a conservative society. When his sexual orientation was discovered, he faced severe persecution, including threats of violence and imprisonment. Fearing for his life, he escaped to another country and sought refugee status. However, Ahmed's claim presented a unique challenge. His persecution was based on social stigma rather than official state actions. The question before the authorities was whether such persecution, which stemmed from societal norms rather than government policies, met the definition of refugee status. The case highlighted the evolving nature of what constitutes persecution. In some countries, societal persecution is recognized, while in others, it must be state-sponsored. Ahmed's story illustrates the ongoing debate within international law about whether refugee status should be granted based on persecution by society at large or only when the state is involved. The third story takes us to a courtroom where a family from a rural area in a conflict-ridden country fought for their right to asylum. The family had been targeted by local militias for their religious beliefs, forcing them to flee. However, the complexity of their case arose from the fact that they had first sought refuge in a neighboring country before eventually applying for asylum in a more distant nation. This raised questions about the concept of first safe country, the idea that refugees should seek protection in the first country they reach rather than moving on to a more preferred destination. The court had to consider whether their fear of persecution was still valid, despite having bypassed other countries where they could have sought asylum. This case underscored the tension between legal principles and the realities faced by those fleeing persecution. The outcome depended heavily on the interpretation of the term safe country, and whether the initial country they fled to truly offered safety and security. These stories, while unique, all reflect the broader challenges within the refugee definition. At the heart of the issue is the interpretation of what it means to be persecuted and who qualifies as a refugee. As one passage from the book poignantly states, The contours of refugee status are still all too obscure, highlighting the ongoing struggle to define these terms in a way that is both just and universally applicable. This obscurity often leaves individuals like Layla, Ahmed, and the rural family in a precarious position, where their safety depends on the legal interpretations of those who may never fully grasp the complexities of their experiences. The Geneva Convention's definition of a refugee, while foundational, is not without its ambiguities. For instance, the phrase, well-founded fear of being persecuted, has been subject to various interpretations, depending on the legal system and cultural context of the country applying it. The book discusses how some courts require proof of a direct and imminent threat, while others are more lenient, recognizing that fear can be based on a broader range of factors, including psychological trauma and societal pressures. The result is a patchwork of decisions, where similar cases can have vastly different outcomes depending on where they are heard. Moreover, the evolving nature of persecution itself adds another layer of complexity. Traditional notions of persecution focused on state actions, but as society changes, so too must our understanding of what constitutes a threat. The rise in cases involving persecution based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and even climate change highlights the need for a more nuanced approach. The book quotes one legal scholar who argues that the refugee definition must be a living instrument, adaptable to the changing realities of the world. This perspective is crucial as we move forward, recognizing that static interpretations of the law can leave many vulnerable individuals unprotected. In conclusion, these stories and the broader discussion around them illustrate that the refugee definition is not just a legal term, but a lifeline for countless individuals around the world. As the editor of Hardly, through understanding these complexities, we might push for more dynamic interpretations of international law, ensuring that it remains responsive to the evolving nature of persecution and the diverse needs of those seeking refuge. To wrap up our journey through the complexities and evolving interpretations of refugee status in international law, let me share one last story that perfectly encapsulates the challenges faced in this domain. Consider the case of Maria, a teacher from a small village who fled her country due to escalating violence and threats against educators. When she applied for asylum, her case seemed straightforward. However, complications arose when the authorities questioned whether the threats she faced were due to her political opinions or merely a result of the general violence in the area. This distinction was crucial because, under the Geneva Convention, persecution must be linked to one of the 5 protected grounds. Maria's story became a pivotal case, highlighting how the interpretation of motives behind persecution can drastically alter the outcome of a refugee claim. Her situation brought to light the often fine line between political persecution and general violence, forcing the courts to delve deep into the context and intentions behind the threats. This story reinforces the key argument we've explored. The refugee definition, while rooted in the Geneva Convention, must continually adapt to the realities of those seeking protection. The law's application is not always straightforward, as seen in the varied outcomes of cases like Maria's. As the editor of Hardly, through learning these insights, we can advocate for a more nuanced and empathetic approach to interpreting refugee status, ensuring that the legal framework evolves to meet the challenges of our times.